Welcome back. I'm Jessie Lanterman, a bee researcher in Dr. Karen Goodell's lab at Ohio State University. And today we're talking about how to recognize the most common species of Ohio bumblebees. In part one, we discussed their biology and natural history, and also some identification resources that you could use. So in part two here, we're going to be going through the 10 or so most common species of bumblebees, and I'll be teaching you the identifying features that you need to recognize them with the naked eye. So feel free to use those keys that you downloaded after part one, your keys or field guides, and follow along. Here we go. So in each of the following slides, you'll see 4 pieces of information about each species. And on the far left, there will be 2 color diagrams, one for the female and one for the male, showing the hair color pattern on the abdomen, the thorax, and on the head. In the middle of each slide, there will be 2 photos of bees out in the wild visiting flowers. Sometimes I've shown you a female and a male, or 2 females, depending how different the male and the female look in that species. In the top right, I've given you a little bit of natural history information about that species. So for each, it will have the location of the nest as either underground or near the surface, meaning under piles of vegetative debris near the surface. And I've also given you the tongue length as short, medium, or long. In the bottom right, you can see a phenology chart of when the queens, workers, and males are active in the summer here in Ohio or in the northeastern US. So this is Bombus impatiens, our most common species of bumblebee here in Ohio, and it's recognized by just one band of yellow at the top of the abdomen. And when we refer to the coloring on the abdomen, it's typical to call the abdominal segments T1, T2, T3, and so on and so forth, just for ease of referring to them. And the segments are numbered starting with the one closest to the thorax. So for Bombus impatiens, we would say that T1, or that first abdominal segment, is all yellow, and the rest, or the tail, T2 through T6, or T2 through T7 on the male, is all black. This is just a reminder to beware of unusual color variations. For Bombus impatiens, I've seen a few individuals where the tail has rusty brown hair instead of black, but far and away, 99.99999% of all Bombus impatiens, the tail is black beyond T1. Another of our common species is Bombus griseocollis, the brown-belted bumblebee. And this one is named for a brown-colored half-moon shape on T2. So T1 is all yellow, as in Bombus impatiens, but on T2, there's this brown or rusty-colored half-moon or semicircle set into a black background. The males look similar to the females in this species, except that the males have especially large eyes, even for male bumblebees, very large eyes. And the nests of this species are often found closer to the surface compared to further underground, as in Bombus impatiens. Here's an unusual looking color variation of Bombus griseocollis to compare to the typical forms we saw on the last page. So in this one, it still has that half moon shape on T2, but in this individual, the hairs are a little more yellow than brown. So be wary of that. So keep this picture in mind, and next we're going to look at one that's sometimes confused with this species. Another very common species here in Ohio is Bombus bimaculatus, the 2-spotted bumblebee. And this one is recognizable by T1, all yellow, like the other 2 we've seen so far. But on T2, there's a W-shaped yellow mark that's the same nice light-colored yellow as on T1. And it's set in a black background. So you can distinguish this from Bombus griseocollis or Bombus griseocollis, the last one we looked at, by the shape of that light colored mark in the middle of T2. It'll either look like a W or like two yellow spots that have merged together in the center of the segment, giving it that common name, two-spotted bumblebee. There are two different color morphs of males of this species. There's one that looks more like the female. There are males that are very similar to the female. And then there are males that have this odd patchy appearance with extra bands of yellow farther down the abdomen. So you can see an example of that on the right. This male has T1 and T2, mostly yellow, and then a band of black fringed with yellow, and then two more bands of yellow. Those three species that we just looked at, as a reminder, are the most common and abundant. In our observations of bumblebees from last summer, the OSU and University of Akron bee team saw about 9,500 of our 10,000 bumblebees were those three species. And then the rest of the species that we're going to look at consisted of about 2% or 1% or 0.5% of those 10,000 observations. So if you can really be confident in your identification of those first three, Bombus impatiens, Bombus griseocollis, and bimaculatus, then that's half the battle. Being able to recognize the common things first will help you realize when you see something that's a little more special and different. So the next group of bumblebees that we'll look at are ones that are still frequently observed in Ohio, but not necessarily as abundant as those first three. The first of this group is Bombus fervidus, or the yellow or golden northern bumblebee. And it's so called for having most of its abdomen this nice bright yellow color. And the tip of the abdomen in both the males and the females is still black, but T1 through 4 are all yellow. It also has a black band across the thorax, in the middle of the thorax between the wings, that also sets it apart from the others. This is one of our long-tongued bumblebees, and the tongue length might mean that they'll use different flowers or be able to access nectar from different flowers if they have a long versus a short tongue or a medium tongue length. So that's Bombus fervidus, the golden and very distinctive looking yellow bumblebee. Next we have Bombus vagans, the half-black bumblebee. And in this species, T1 and T2 are solid yellow, so compared to Bombus bimaculatus or griseocollis, which had some lighter hair or colored hair on T2. Bombus vagans, it's all yellow on T2 in addition to T1. And the males look very similar in this species. The next two species that we'll look at, Bombus auricomus and then Bombus pensylvanicus, are very similar looking in that they're both large, very large bumblebees compared to the others with particularly dark wings. You can see the wings of these two females are almost black looking. So they're both large, distinctive looking bees. And both have T2 and T3 yellow. And then the differences between them are in the color of T1 and the color of the hairs on the back of the head. In Bombus auricomus, the black and gold bumblebee that you see here, on T1 there are small patches of yellow hair on the far lateral sides of T1, but it's black in the middle of T1. And on the head in this species, in Bombus auricomus, the females and males will have a patch of yellow hair behind those three false eyes on the top of the forehead. So I like to remember that as Bombus auricomus has a golden aura or a golden crown on the back of the head. So that's Bombus auricomus. By comparison, Bombus pensylvanicus, the American bumblebee, on T1, the yellow creeps across into the center of the segment as well as just on the sides in Bombus auricomus. So in the picture of the female on the right, you can see that she has some yellow hair in the center of T1 as well. And the hair on the back of the head is black in this species as compared to the yellow hair on the back of the head in Bombus auricomus. Otherwise, they're fairly similar looking, long-tongued bees and large, dark wings, very distinctive looking bees, and they emerge a little later in the season compared to Bombus impatiens and bimaculatus and fervidus. We have a species called the confusing bumblebee, or Bombus perplexus, which is aptly named because the hair on the abdomen is like a merger of the color patterns of all the other species. So in Bombus perplexus, T1 and T2, T3 are all yellow, and then the next segment down would be half yellow and half black, with a yellow patch in the center and more or less black on the sides. That sets it apart from Bombus fervidus, where most of the abdomen was yellow and then just the very tail was black. In Bombus perplexus, the males have even more yellow coloration than in the females. Nest parasite species are fairly rare, but of the nest parasite species here in Ohio, the one you're most likely to see is called Bombus citrinus, or the lemon cuckoo bumblebee. And this is a nest parasite of some of our other common species like Bombus impatiens, bimaculatus, and vagans. And you'll recognize this one when you see it because it's lacking in the females, it's lacking yellow hair on the abdomen. The males do still have yellow hair on the abdomen on T1 and T2, and then large band of black, and then a little bit of yellow hair near the tail on the abdomen. But the females will, most of the time, have an all dark abdomen. There are several rare species in Ohio that are of conservation concern that I want to make sure you know what they look like, so you can, if you see one, be very excited. Bombus affinis, the rusty patched bumblebee, looks similar to some of our other ones in that T1 is all yellow, but on T2, think of it as yellow with a rusty patch set into the top middle part of the segment. So if you're comparing that to Bombus griseocollis, which also has that rusty half moon shape in the center of the segment, in Bombus griseocollis, it's set into a black background, but on Bombus affinis, there's yellow neatly surrounding that rusty colored patch. So this one has a short tongue, a little bit different than the others that we've looked at so far, which either had a medium or long tongue length. Something interesting to point out. B.terricola, the yellow banded bumblebee, is the last one that we're going to look at today. This is always fairly rare in Ohio and is most likely to be seen along the eastern side of the state. So if you're over there, do keep an eye out for it. You might spot this rare bumblebee. And in this one, T1 is black instead, and T2, T3 are yellow. Then there's another black band, and then a little more yellow on the tail, too. So that's a distinctive looking bumblebee, different from our other species. I'd like to encourage you to take photographs of any bumblebees that you might not be sure of your field identification to species. So when you take photographs, keep in mind where the identifying features are for telling the species apart, and try to get a photo from several different angles so that you can see the abdomen hair color pattern, the back of the thorax, and also the back of the head. That'll make a huge difference in your ability to identify or to check your identification to species later. Another tip for taking photos of bees on flowers is try to position yourself so that you're not casting a shadow over your subject that you're photographing, because that will sometimes scare them away from the flower. You can either photograph bees directly on the flower that they're sitting on, which is kind of nice because then it gives you information about what the bees are feeding on, or you can try to capture the bee and place it in a plastic bag or in a small jar of some kind to get a photo. I've given two examples on this slide of what a good and a poor quality photo look like from the identification perspective. So even though the bees in both of them are picturesquely posed on the flower, the photo on the lower left isn't very good for identification because you can't see the hair color pattern on the abdomen, and you can see the thorax a little bit, but not the middle of the back of the thorax. The photo on the upper right, by comparison, is ideal for using for identification because you can see all of the main areas where the hair color is important for telling the species apart. So the last thing we'll do today is take a little quiz. On the following slides, I'll show you pictures of some of our different bumblebee species that we just talked about, and I want you to test your knowledge on species ID and try to come up with the answer first before I give it to you. So as a reminder, you might want to pause the video on each picture that I show before I give the answer so that you can try to run that photo through the key and decide for yourself which species it is before I give the answer. Ready? Here we go. So here's your first photo, and I might use all of the species, or they might not all appear in this quiz. I might use a species more than once. Just a few hints. Here we have a Bombus fervidus, which is also called the yellow or the golden northern bumblebee. You can see that most of the abdomen, except for the little black tail, is that golden color. Here's your second bee. If you guessed Bombus impatiens, the common eastern bumblebee, you're right. This bumblebee has just one yellow segment on the top of the abdomen, and then all the rest is black from on the tail down. This is a male Bombus griseocollis, or Bombus griseocollis, the brown belted bumblebee, and he's nicely posing, sitting on this milkweed flower so that you can easily see the color pattern on the abdomen. He has T1 all yellow, and then that rusty colored half moon circle on T2 set on a black backdrop. This is Bombus vagans, a worker of the half-black bumblebee, which has the first two abdominal segments are all yellow, and then the tail is black. This one was a little bit tricky, but this is a Bombus auricomus female, or a black and gold bumblebee. So remember, this is one of those two species that are large with dark wings and kind of difficult to tell apart. On T1 of this species, Bombus auricomus, the far sides have small patches of yellow hair, and T2 and T3 are all yellow. And then on the top of the head, there's a tuft of yellow hairs on top of the forehead in between those three false eyes. This is a Bombus impatiens again, one of the most common and probably the most abundant bumblebee that you might see. And here we have a Bombus bimaculatus, or a two-spotted bumblebee. You can nicely see the W-shaped yellow mark on the second abdominal segment on this one, which is sitting on the lupin flower. And here we have a Bombus pensylvanicus female, or American bumblebee. So you'll see on T1, the first abdominal segment, that the yellow comes clear across from the sides into the middle of the segment. So there's a yellow band on T1 with black at the top, and also T2 and T3 are completely yellow. The back of the head is a little hard to see on this one, but at the top of the head, the hairs are black instead of yellow, as in Bombus auricomus, another identifying feature of Bombus pensylvanicus, that dark hair on top of the head instead of the yellow hair. And by comparison, here's a second Bombus fervidus, a yellow or golden northern bumblebee. So you'll see that T1 through T4 on the abdomen are all completely yellow in this species. And last but not least, here's a picture of a rusty-patched bumblebee, Bombus affinis. This is the endangered species of bumblebee that we've been searching for in our survey, and hopefully we'll spot with your help this summer. So in this one, T1 is solid yellow, and then on T2, there's a rusty patched mark set inside of a yellow backdrop. All right, thank you for joining us today. And I hope that you've gained in confidence in bumblebee identification from watching this video and learned something you didn't know before about their natural history. If you'd like to volunteer observations of bumblebees, you can report photos of bumblebees or observations on the Ohio Bee Atlas on iNaturalist, or you can participate in our Spring Queen survey. So for more details on that and how to sign up, you can visit our webpage at the OSU Bee Lab/Bumblebee survey. Thanks, and good luck with bumblebee watching this summer.